So, the RX1R Mark III. You know, I'm actually quite torn on this camera. Let's talk about it. What up, good people? Welcome back to the channel. I hope all of y'all are doing well out there. And that's right, we have the Sony RX1R Mark III in-house. Now, first and foremost, I gotta give a huge shout out to Sony for sending this camera out for me to try. This is actually the first camera I have ever received from a camera brand to test out, and I'm super excited for the opportunity, so thank you, Sony. But I've been using this camera for about a week, and like I said at the top of this video, I'm kind of torn on this camera. On one hand, I wanna defend it, and on the other hand, I wanna call it out, especially within the context of using it alongside both my Fuji XM5 and my Ricoh GR III. And so I think I'm gonna do both. I'm gonna defend it and call it out a little bit. So with that said, let's go ahead and get into it, y'all. Right off the bat, I have to mention that the Sony RX1R Mark III is $5,100. I repeat, 5,100 doll hairs. Plus tax. And so I will definitely speak on that once I get to the portion where I'm calling out this camera, especially when we're talking about the shortcomings that this camera has. But spoiler alert, I actually like the RX1R Mark III. It is a really good camera. It has a lot of really good merits to it, and I actually really enjoyed using it. And so I'm gonna start with the defense portion and everything I liked about it, and then I'll get to calling it out later. Now, first off, the whole point of the RX1R Mark III is that it is a tiny compact camera with a large full-frame high-resolution 61 megapixel sensors. And one of the biggest pet peeves of mine is when these powerful little tiny compact cameras come out. In the photographers community, in the YouTube camera community, a lot of people are just recommending just get the bigger version. I remember when the Fuji XM5 came out, it had a lot of good reception, but I also heard a lot of people saying just get the Fuji XS20. It has a lot of the same features. It has a bigger battery, a bigger grip, it has IBIS, has more features. And my response to that was just, I don't want that. It's a bigger camera. I want the small camera. Can I get the small camera? I'm willing to sacrifice a little bit of ergonomics and 10% of the features just to have a smaller overall profile. Now with the RX1R, it's a little bit different because its counterpart is the Sony A7CR. I have my Sony A7C II here, which is a similar body to the A7CR, and I paired it with a 35mm f1.8. So that is a good estimation of what the A7CR would look like next to the RX1R, and it's quite a bit bigger. It takes up more space in a bag. But what makes this case different is that the A7CR is actually a lot cheaper than the RX1R Mark III. I understand why people would recommend the A7CR over the RX1R Mark III just because of the price, but when we're talking size, I don't think that's a reason to recommend the A7CR over the RX1R Mark III, because the whole point of these cameras is that they are meant to be part of your everyday carry. You bring these along with your smartphone, your sunglasses, your keys, a pocket knife if you carry one. You just throw it in a little EDC bag and then you head out the door and go live your life. For most people, when leaving the house with these cameras, the main intent isn't necessarily going to be to go out and shoot. You're going out to live your life. You go meet friends, you go to coffee shops, you go to the movies, you go to concerts, you go to bars. You have all these great moments while you're out living your life. And if you should encounter some of those moments and want to document them, you have your little tiny compact powerful camera that can help you do just that. And with these cameras, the quality that they're able to produce is on the same level as their larger counterparts. And so it kind of feels like cheating because you have these tiny little unassuming cameras, but the level of image quality that you're able to get out of them is just amazing. You could use these for production, you could use these for content creation. It's just not its main intent, you know, but they are powerful enough even at these tiny compact sizes. Now, speaking of compact tiny sizes, just comparing these three, the RX1R Mark III actually has about the same footprint as the Fuji XM5 with the 27mm f2.8. They're about the same width, but the RX1R Mark III is a little bit taller and the XM5 is a little bit thicker. And they also have about the same weight. With the Ricoh GR III, it is definitely smaller. It is the only one of these three that you can put into a pants pocket, but I don't look at the Ricoh GR III as having a fixed lens. The Ricoh GR III has a retractable lens, and that is the only reason why you can fit it in a pants pocket. So when I hear people say, oh, the RX1R Mark III is tiny and compact, but you can't really put it in a pants pocket. You can't really do that with any of these except retractable lens cameras. But I don't mind because I have an EDC bag, and the RX1R Mark III as well as the XM5, they leave a lot of room in my EDC bag for me to put other things, and so that compactness still serves its purpose. Now, as far as ergonomics and build quality, I definitely say the RX1R Mark III feels better than the XM5. The Sony camera has its same magnesium alloy body as you would see in any other Sony camera like the A7 IV, A7C II, and the grip is really nice. The ergonomics on the RX1R Mark III feels so good that I don't really feel a need for a third-party grip. I would still use a wrist strap just because I use wrist straps on all my cameras, but I think just alone, it feels pretty nice to hold in the hand with that rubber grip, and the body feels much higher quality than that on the XM5 or the Ricoh GR III. But size and ergonomics out of the way, let's talk about photography on the RX1R Mark III. First off, I want to start with overall user experience because I think there are some elements of this camera that really lend itself to a great photography shooting experience. First and foremost, I actually like the lens on the RX1R Mark III. And it's kind of weird to me because on one hand, I'm hearing people say, oh, it's an old lens, it's 10 years old, yeah, it's not good, they should have upgraded the lens. But on the other hand, I hear some of the same people saying, oh, I adapted these vintage lenses on my Nikon or my Fuji camera. So which one is it? Do you want older lenses or do you not want older lenses? So that's my thing. I think this is a good lens. I think the results were still pretty sharp from it. I think it does have some character to it because it is an older lens. I also like that it has a macro mode on it. I actually used it quite a bit in order to capture some details of overall larger pictures that I was getting. And so I really like some of the qualities of this lens. It has an aperture ring. It has a nice f2 aperture for low light photography and video if you're going to be doing that. I didn't have a problem with the lens at all. I think it worked out really well, and it's fairly compact. I also like that they mapped the crop zoom feature to the C1 custom button. That felt very natural for me using it, just cropping in from 35 millimeters to 50 millimeters to 70 millimeters. It just felt seamless, you know, it just felt nice. I also really like that they added a thread to the shutter button. That way I can add a soft shutter release. But oddly enough, the soft shutter release buttons that I have for my Fuji cameras, like my XM5 here, they screwed into the RX1R Mark III, but all of them ended up a little crooked. I don't know if that was a defect in the threading of the shutter button of this particular RX1R Mark III, or if you actually have to get more specialized Sony soft shutter release buttons. I will admit that I did notice slower performance as far as autofocus on the RX1R Mark III versus my A7C II or my A7 IV, but it was a negligible difference, y'all. If you're not used to using Sony cameras, like say you mainly use Nikon or Panasonic or Fujifilm, you're not gonna notice the difference in autofocus. In fact, Sony autofocus is so good that even their slower autofocus is better than a lot of other camera brands. I'm just saying, Sony's autofocus is that good. And so when it comes to actually real world use, getting shots, I didn't really have a problem with the autofocus on this camera. Yes, it was a little bit slower, but it still did the job. Now, the last things on user experience as I was using this camera have more to do with the LCD panel and the EVF. They were serviceable. They weren't the best quality. I think they were actually about the same quality as my A7C II because I was noticing a lot of the same little quirks. Namely, the image preview that I was getting in the panel and in the EVF wasn't the actual result of the images when I put them onto my computer. A lot of the images looked a lot brighter on my LCD panel or in the EVF versus when I got it on my computer, a lot of the images looked a lot darker. And so I felt like I wasn't getting a super accurate preview of the photos that I was snapping, but maybe I got that wrong. Maybe it was just a brightness setting on the LCD and the EVF that I didn't see because I didn't really adjust those settings at all as I was using this camera. But the second thing with the LCD and the EVF is that even if I was on a lower aperture like f8 or f11 and I half pressed the shutter to focus, my main subject or whatever was going to be in focus, that would be in focus, but it would give me this preview with this really big bokeh. It would just blur out the background even if I'm at f11 or f8. And so I wasn't getting a true representation of what the final image output would be. I didn't always want to blow out the background. I wanted to see what the entire scene would look like in focus, really just trying to capture more in focus in the shot. It was hard to see that as I was half pressing the shutter because the preview really wanted to blur out the background. That was a little disorienting for me, but overall the results came out as I wanted. I got most of the things that I wanted in focus, and it wasn't just one main central point and the rest being blurred out or knocked out. And so that that was a weird little thing for me as far as the image preview on the EVF and the LCD screen. Another thing about the LCD I just want to mention is I thought the fact that it was a fixed screen would bother me more for photography, but it actually didn't. It actually reminded me a lot of the Ricoh GR3 because the Ricoh GR3 also does have a fixed screen. And so I was able to adapt. It wasn't really that much of an inconvenience for me. Don't get me wrong, I did still want that tilt screen, but it wasn't as bad as I thought it was gonna be. But as far as image quality, it is pretty much what you would expect from any Sony camera. The images were really sharp, they were really crisp. They had that commercial look, that Sony commercial look that people are used to seeing. A lot of people are calling it clinical, but yes, it does have that look. But that also gives you a lot of leeway to edit them in post. You take the RAWs, you put them into your computer. I was able to push them around, develop the RAWs, and they worked out pretty nice. But aside from that standard Sony look, the biggest thing I wanted to test with this camera were the creative looks. Sony did add some new ones in the FL2 and FL3. I played with those a little bit. I think the creative looks by themselves, they're nice. They add more character to your Sony shots, but I think the magic really comes when you go in, you tweak the creative look settings like the contrast, the fade, the highlight shadows, the tone curve, the clarity, all that good stuff. When you tweak those in conjunction with white balance shifts and your dynamic range setting, I think that's where you start to get the magic and you start to create your own little Sony recipes. And I was not disappointed. I was able to get some really interesting looking photos that definitely had more character. But even with all that tweaking with the creative looks, I did take the RX1R Mark III out with the XM5 and the GR3. And one thing I noticed is that while you can get more character in your Sony shots, it still doesn't really come close to either the Fuji camera or the Ricoh for just having that filmic quality. It actually does get closer, but it's still not quite there because these two cameras, the XM5, the Ricoh GR3, they just kind of have that filmic quality, both with the colors, with the highlight shadow roll off, and mainly the images are a little bit softer. Sony images are just super sharp. You're not gonna knock out all that sharpness. The images coming straight out of the XM5 and the Ricoh GR3, they're a little bit softer, and so they have more of that filmic quality. Now, the last area where I kind of want to defend the RX1R Mark III, I'm not going to defend it all the way, I'm going to defend it a little bit, is in video. I didn't shoot a lot of video on this, but what I did shoot, I think the video quality came out really nice. It's just as nice as the video quality on my A7C II, on my A7 IV. You have the same level of bitrate. You can shoot 4K all intra if you have a fast enough SD card, so you can get some really high quality 4K video, but you only get 4K 24 and 4K 30 at the highest shooting levels. And so a lot of people were a little bit annoyed that it doesn't have 4K 60, which I'm not too mad at. I don't really shoot a lot of 4K 60 in those scenarios where it's just my everyday carry camera. But I will say, at a camera this size, the XM5 has proved that you can have 4K 60, you can have 6.2K open gate, you can have some high quality video features. But quite honestly, I don't think Sony meant for this to be a video camera, not only with the video features, but also with the fixed LCD display. I don't think they intended for this to be a video camera. It is a photography first camera. But even so, the video features that they put in here are pretty nice because you can still shoot 10-bit, you can still shoot S-Log3 if you want to color grade, and you can shoot S-Cinetone if you just want a really good look straight out of the camera for the moments you want to document, like concerts or just being out and about with friends, or if you're traveling, just documenting a city. You have that. You can still get high quality video. It's not like the Ricoh GR here where it's like pretty low quality 1080p. Even the recently announced GR4 still has 1080p only, and so I don't think that's too bad. I think you still get the high quality video that you're used to seeing from Sony cameras. One thing I did notice for video with the RX1R Mark III is you couldn't really use that same crop in feature with the RX1R Mark III for video. With the A7C II, you do have APS-C crop mode, but the RX1R Mark III didn't really have anything like that. But it does have a zoom function, so you can digitally zoom in, but you have to do more of a slow zoom in toggle. All right, here we go. It's time to call out the RX1R Mark III. Now, like I mentioned at the beginning of this video This camera is $5,100. And quite frankly, I don't think it's worth $5,100. I'm just being honest. I'm sorry, Sony. But bear with me because I'm gonna go in two different directions with this. On the more practical side, for us normies, I'm including myself in this, $5,100 is too much to spend on a camera that doesn't meet all of my needs. For $5,100, I'm gonna need a camera to do everything I need it to do. I am a special use case where I do use these tiny cameras for content creation. I know I mentioned EDC earlier, but I do use these for content creation, so I would need it to do that. And that's why I kind of like the XM5 here. It is a tiny compact camera, but it does everything I needed to do for photo, and it does everything I needed to do for video. And so when I think about the RX1R Mark III, it not being able to have interchangeable lenses, it has a fixed screen, so I can't tilt it, I can't articulate it. It doesn't have all the video features that I need if I'm gonna do some content creation. The RX1R Mark III has a lot of good features, like I mentioned earlier, and don't get me wrong, but for $5,100, I needed to have all the features I need. And so that's just too big of a price tag for me to spend on a camera that doesn't meet the things I needed to do. That's the more practical side. On the more high-end consumer, luxury consumer, someone who's used to buying expensive, high-ticket item things, the person who would buy a Rolex instead of an Apple Watch, a high-end Mercedes like a McLaren, or a Lamborghini over a Tesla. In that respect, for $5,100, I feel like Sony could have charged that same price, keep the same features that are in it today, let all that be the same, but for $5,100, I don't think they sold this camera as premium enough for that type of consumer. The first area is in the build quality. Now, don't get me wrong, this is a really well-built camera. It's built like all the other Sony cameras, that magnesium alloy body. It's really tough, it's really sturdy. I feel very confident with this camera when holding this camera, even if I were to drop it. The grip is nice, the build quality is solid, it's sturdy, it's good. But that type of consumer, the luxury consumer, the high-end consumer, they're looking for premium. Even the dials, if they would have just made them brass, that could have been nice. Or if they used other more premium materials. The RX1R Mark III looks like every other Sony camera as far as the body materials. And for $5,100, it should communicate a level above, a more premium level. And so for the higher end consumer, they wouldn't even realize that this is meant to be a more luxury item until they saw the price. They would just think, oh, it's just a normal camera. In fact, I took this out for a photo walk and I asked some of the people how much they thought this camera cost, and at most, I got a guess of $2,000. And so this doesn't really look like a premium camera versus something like a Leica where it looks more premium. Even a lot of Fuji cameras look more premium, like your GFX100RF, your X100VI. Those cameras actually look more premium than the RX1R Mark III. Another thing about the high-end luxury consumers is they like to know that they're buying in on heritage. You know, Leica has heritage, Mercedes has heritage, Rolex has heritage. Sony, it has heritage, but not in the realm of craftsmanship like Leica has communicated, like even Fuji communicates. If you look at a Fuji keynote, when they announce a camera, they'll talk about the heritage and everything that they've done, their heritage in film and all that other stuff. I don't remember hearing any of that when the RX1R Mark III came out. They didn't tell any story, they didn't tell, you know, the painstaking process of getting such a big high-end sensor into a tiny body. They didn't talk about any of that. They didn't really communicate the premium, one-of-a-kind nature of this type of camera. Because make no mistake, a camera this small with a full-frame, high-resolution sensor, that's one of a kind. I think there's also the Sigma FP out there, but that may be a little bit bigger than this camera. So I don't think there's a camera this small with the full-frame sensor. And so Sony should have leaned into that more, communicate to a high-end consumer why this camera is so special. Sony just doesn't communicate luxury, you know? I think they can get there, but I think they needed to do more work to communicate how premium this camera is. More premium build materials, but then also the story behind the craft of this camera. And so I think for $5,100, they didn't really do that enough for the high-end consumer. And so that's just my take on both ends of the spectrum, both the more practical consumer and then the high-end consumer. Curious to hear what y'all think. That's just me just kind of giving my own opinion, but that's pretty much my thoughts on the RX1R Mark III. It's a really good camera, but at most, I would say this is a $3,500 camera because it does have the unique feature of that full frame 61 megapixel sensor. It has really solid build quality and it is actually a joy to use. But with that said, y'all, I'm gonna go ahead and get up out of here. If you like this video, go ahead and drop it a like. If you haven't subscribed, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. Hit the notification bell to stay informed on all my future videos. And until next time, y'all, I will catch y'all later.